One of your recent newsletter issues I read, you were talking about how you've grown an audience of around 400,000 followers. You've made over 900 posts over 3 years. And one of the reasons you've been able to do that is that you don't aim for, or more accurately, you don't wait for perfection.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I kind of like reshared the article because it was like 400,000 followers, 900 posts, 3 years, zero perfection. And I just
Yeah.
fucking love that. Right.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about your just the mental approach you take to creativity?
I think it stems from just all those years I didn't do anything creative. So that's kind of the root of where I've kind of built this philosophy. And it is 100% quantity over quality, meaning my approach is, and if you're familiar with this story, there is this great book on man, now I'm forgetting the name. It's I think it's art of man, now I'm so it's I will try to remember the name of the book, but basically it's got this really famous case study where you have a sculpture class, and in the sculpture class picks half of the class and says, all right, you are going to make 30 sculptures every day for 30 days. And then on the other half of the class says, you are going to have 30 days to make one great sculpture. And at the end of this 30 days, what they found is the group that made one sculpture a day for 30 days, so quantity, made vastly better um, sculptures by day 30 versus the one that waited 30 days to finally perfect this one thing. And that particular case study, that particular example is just like kind of just echoes through my entire creative philosophy, which is it's far more important to get the full rep and get more of those full reps than it is to get one perfect rep. Because I really kept waiting and thinking, okay, if I just figure out exactly the right approach with the right tools in the right medium, in the right channel, then I won't make any mistakes and I will be able to just go through this in a smooth process. So I just have to wait till I'm ready to just get going. And then like year after year after year after year, I just delayed the start and I delayed getting in those reps. And, fast forward, I'm like over 40 years old and haven't done a thing on the creative side for myself, rather. And so that has just been my engine that keeps me like, all right, every day, what I'm trying to do is not focus on getting in that perfect rep. I'm just trying to get as many reps as possible to perfect my process versus having a perfect piece to share. And I think that has really been the focus of everything I try and do. And it's what I teach my students, both in the cohort and in my high school students. I'm just like, look, we are going for reps right now. There is a point, there is, of course, a tipping point at some point where you're like, okay, now there's these expectations out of the work that I create. So I have to make something better. But even with that, I try to resist that particular limit in my thinking so that because even once I start feeling that, I start feeling this tension in the process where I'm like, okay, now I shouldn't post this because I don't think it's good enough. And now I'm like starting to like decrease my output. And that is something I still struggle with, but I again, I think I've built this foundation of just having this engine of quantity to get to quality. It's not that you don't aim for quality, it's that you don't start at quality. So you have to remember that, just continuing to push and push and push to build more volume. And I kind of think back to almost all the great creators, Mozart, I mean, people who've created these pieces that resonate throughout time, they created a lot. We only remember a few pieces. And so that is also kind of works into that philosophy, because I kind of think I should not be, and I don't want to say arrogant, but I don't want to be so prideful to think that I know what quality is. So like, if I think I'm going to wait till this is perfect and I then share it out into the world, that's assuming that I know what good is. And at the end of the day, it's not you who decides, it's the reader, it's the audience. And there's no way to know what is going to resonate. So you create volume so that those few pieces that will ultimately hopefully resonate throughout time do make their way into the surface. So yeah, that's kind of, I don't know, a word vomit of what I think about my creative approach. But yeah.
So you kind of touched on your background. Can you walk me through how one, just sort of your career, your professional career first, and how you got into this, the quote unquote creator economy?
Yeah. So I am a teacher by trade. So I've been teaching. I just finished my 21st year teaching high school film and animation. And the funny thing is, even when I was in high school, I remember when I was like in high school, as a high school kid, I took art class, and it was only in my art class that I felt a sense of purpose. And my art teacher, who was, God love him, almost to a fault encouraging, like, wouldn't really say anything specific, but just walk by and be like, "Oh, that's excellent, 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 that's excellent, fantastic, that's excellent." And but that, even that little false maybe praise was enough to like keep me going when I was that age. And I remember thinking in high school, man, I would love to be a high school teacher, like to be able to help kids like myself who didn't feel necessarily like they loved school very much, but I loved having a space in school to be able to just be fully present in a creative state of flow. So even in high school, I remember thinking, man, wouldn't it be cool to teach art at some point in life? Like that would be cool. And so I eventually, found my way into becoming a high school film and animation teacher. And as I was doing that, what I loved about it is that I was helping students reach their creative potential. But the funny thing, as I was doing that, is the kids would just be like, "Man, this is Mr. Milani. What are you working on?" Because once I helped one kid, they're like, they all started just being like, "Mr. Milani, you should be like doing this. What are you working on? What's your film project? What's your animation project? Blah blah blah." And I was just like, I've been expending all my creative energy, all my creative juices are just flowing towards this. How can I help the students get to where they want to be? And so I just kind of never really had a good answer for that. I just embarrassing. I was kind of actually embarrassed by it, because when you teach creative arts, you don't want to be someone. Or rather, I felt like a little bit of an imposter, because like if I'm telling them to do this and yet I'm not doing that, it doesn't feel good. It didn't feel like it aligned in some way. And so that feeling kind of was with me throughout all these years. And it was just like this just low hum buzz under everything I was doing. And if there finally came like this point where I remember talking to colleagues and I was like, I just can't keep doing this, keep teaching a creative art without also saying, look, I understand how this feels like. I understand what you're going through, because I can teach film, but I found that the majority of what I'm also doing as a teacher is playing and somehow like helping them swerve through the creative path, all the different, ups and downs, the shiny object syndrome, all the doubts that you have during the creative process, the zone of ambiguity that you have to navigate when you're trying to go from idea, conception to execution, all these different things that a person has to overcome in order to get something creative outputted into the world. So I wanted to be able to talk to them not just about, oh, this is the process, and say, this is what I went through as I did this. And so that kind of like feeling kept coming with me as I was, you know, teaching film and animation. So there finally came a point where, and the point was kind of out of everyone's control, is during the pandemic. Like, you know, I'm journaling through this feeling. I had a lot more time to think, and I was really going through an existential crisis during the pandemic. I'm sure as many people were, but you know, we couldn't be in the classroom anymore, and I did not like teaching film and animation through Zoom. Is not what I signed up for when I became a teacher. And I started to really just doubt, like, okay, well, if I'm no longer a teacher, then who am I? Like, what am I doing? You know, what 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 am I going to do? And so, you know, I was journaling through all these navigating, trying to navigate some of these emotions, some of these like doubts, and definitely feeling like, okay, lost. And I remember writing very specifically that I needed to just I went back to, like, you know, watching Ali Abdal, watching all these different people online, these creators that I admired, and um, listened to their podcasts and whatnot. And I was just like, you know, it would be nice if I just freaking did something. And then I was like, I just need to start. I just need to start doing something. And I realized, holy crap, you know, I have like all these journals that I've been writing for years and years, right? And it just had this deja vu feeling. So I just like went through, like, I was like flipping through my journals after I wrote, like, okay, I need to have this creative practice. I need to start doing something. And so I started flipping through years of writing, and I found that I had written these exact same words 10 years plus ago. And I was like, man, I tell you, there's nothing that stares at you more just blankly in the face and says, "What the hell are you going to actually do?" than your own words. Like, you literally wrote those same exact words, and there is no way to, you know, back out of the fact that you did not follow through on what you said you were going to do 10 years ago. And now you're saying the same thing. So I was like, okay, that was the breaking point. I was like, okay, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to start. So I started a newsletter. That was the very first thing I did. I watched an Ali Abdal video post that was like, start a blog. So I started a blog. Nothing. Like, you know, if anyone has ever spent like 3-4 hours on something plus, and then nothing, and then spend another 5-6 hours on something, and then nothing. And to be fair, I didn't share what I was doing with anyone. Like, I didn't say, oh, hey guys, here's what I'm doing. I was just like, if my work is good enough, people will find it, right? And I didn't really understand how the internet really worked. I'm 40 plus years old. Like, I haven't been on social media. In fact, I hated social media, and I can't say I love it now, but I understand its place. So I didn't really understand how to navigate any of this stuff. And but I, you know, I was just like, you know, screw it. I'm just going to keep on doing it. And so I, I remember talking to my wife about it, and I was like, you know, I think I'm going to just keep working on this blog. And she's like, do people still read blogs? You know, I was like, not mine. But I just kept, you know, I just kept trying. And then I came across Ship 30, which is a cohort writing course from Dickie Bush and Nicholas Cole. And what really resonated with me as I came across their work was, Dickie was talking about how he had started a blog, and how, okay, that didn't work, and he started posting on Twitter. And I was like, Twitter? Like, Twitter? Oh my God, like, all if you're not someone who actually writes and creates, like Twitter is like this just hellhole of just toxicity. That's what I thought. And I didn't know that there were people on Twitter who were actually, creating meaningful work, like people posting their writing, posting their ideas, posting thoughtful um, visuals. So I signed up for Ship 30. That was kind of what got me actually posting on social media. And about maybe halfway through the course, I started coming across these visuals that were popping up on Twitter. And I was like, what is this? Like, Jack Butcher, visualize value. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. This is kind of neat. This kind of looks like some of the stuff that I do in class, and, in presentations and whatnot. And so I just kind of had this thought like, you know what? Like, I use metaphors a lot in class. And what if I just started posting this stuff with the writing? And so I did. And that was like back in March 2022. And that just actually had an impact. Up until that point, it was really other Ship 30 folks who were commenting on what I was creating. And that was really frustrating for me because as much as I love the community, I was like, yeah, okay, but this is just us talking to each other. It doesn't seem like anyone outside of Ship 30 is seeing or connecting with anything that I'm doing. You know, what is this? What's going on? So the first time I put a visual out though, I was like, oh, this person is not from Ship 30. This person is not from Ship 30. They're commenting. What's going on? And so I was like, okay, so that was a signal. And so I did a few more. And about, I don't know, maybe 5, 6 visuals in, I had a post on leadership versus management, which is something I kind of share in my department meetings. I'm like, this is not, this is what we're supposed to be doing. This is what we're supposed to be. And so I just created a visual around that idea. And that post had more engagement and likes, whatever comments and whatnot, than I had total followers. And so I was like, whoa, this is interesting. Never seen this before. And so just that signal kind of just kept pushing me forward. And I created all these other visuals. And there were points where I was really just because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work posting online. I mean, especially early on. And it's invisible progress. You don't doesn't feel like you're progressing sometimes. It's lonely. You're working alone. And it's hard to know if what you're doing is making an impact. So even after a couple months, so I started in March, around May, um, June, I was like, you know what? It's about to be my birthday. And around that time, I hit my 1,000 followers. So around that time, I was like, oh, okay, it's close to my birthday. And uh, I just hit 1,000 followers as kind of like this way to celebrate. I decided to create my first thread with visuals. And so I did. I kind of spent midnight, like up until midnight, like just crafting up the post, scheduling it for the next day, and went to bed, woke up, woke up to 2,000 plus followers. So went to bed at 1,000, woke up to 2,000. And I was like, whoa, what the hell? Like, what just happened? And my first like truly viral post happened. But what was interesting was I didn't feel good. It didn't feel like I thought it would feel like. Like I expected, oh, I did it kind of feeling. But I didn't do it. I had already done it, meaning those were all the visuals I had already created up to this point. And why that moment was really meaningful is that early on, it taught me this really important lesson that it's not the quality of your work, it's the packaging of your work. And it's usually not necessarily that you're not moving forward, it's that there's there's almost like this side effect of doing the work consistently eventually, and you have to trust that. And I really kind of like struggled with this at first. I was just like, yeah, I don't know why I don't feel that great about it. And it was just, again, it was like this idea, like up until this point, I thought that I wasn't making any progress. And I was like, oh, the algorithm is a big part of this whole game. And that evidence of the impact of packaging was really important for me to just frame this entire creative or creator economy experience in a way that is hopefully more healthy, which is not to be too obsessed with, oh, this post didn't do well at all. And I just kind of think, well, that's helpful to know because, obviously any kind of feedback is helpful, but also not to take too much stock into the fact that something bombed and try again with small iteration later. And again, that's what plays into this whole iteration mindset instead of this perfection mindset. It's just like, okay, not there yet for this one. And I just kind of keep moving forward with that. But that was kind of the start. And anytime I, after that, I kind of started thinking, I'm just not sure if what I'm doing is making any kind of impact. Something crazy will happen. Like, uh, all of a sudden, I get a message from Gregory McEwen, and I was like, wait, is this the real Gregory McEwen? Or Adam Grant posts one of my visuals, and I'm like, is this the real Adam Grant? And by the way, Adam Grant is probably one of the coolest people out there in the world who will actually engage and talk with you for real. Like that's which is great. I you know obviously very busy person, but still super gracious with his time. And yeah, so that was like anytime I'm kind of like, I'm not really sure, all of a sudden Justin Welsh reaches out, or all of a sudden like Sahil Bloom is gets a hold of something I've done. And like that just kept being a little bit of a spark to kind of keep it going. And one of our mutual friends, Lawrence Yeo, like this is one of the biggest lessons that I just always quote him on this because it's one of my favorite things that he's ever talked about, which is this balance that you have to have as a creator between internal motivation and external validation. And it's like you have to be internally motivated, which was check for me. Like, okay, I spent years and years and years wanting to get started. That was the internal motivation. But I realized if I'm writing a blog and no one is looking at it, there's no external validation, and that was not keeping the engine going. Anytime that I felt like the engine was getting clogged with self doubt, something from an external motivating force came in and greased the wheels a little bit more so that I could keep going again. And I think there's balance is really, really important. So it's one of those things that I think we need to be mindful of as creators as we're moving forward. So yeah, that's pretty much kind of like how I got started and what's been kind of keeping me going since.
So at this point, you've kind of reached niche fame, right? Like 400K across platforms. It only continues to grow. Um, if I mean, you probably have more than 400K at this point, but um, at what point did you like realize, oh fuck, like people know who I am?
I don't know if I still think that, but
Well, because
um,
earlier you referenced like Sahil and Justin and like Adam, all those are the people reaching out to you. At a certain point, like when you're starting out, we've all kind of done this of like there are people who either you look up to because they inspired you, or maybe you want to emulate their trajectory or whatever. And at a certain point, you become that person that other people are trying to emulate, other people are inspired by, or other people who inspired you are now like, "Hey man, I really like your stuff. Can we talk? Can we hang out?" Right? At what point did it like register to you that like, "Oh, I there's a specific threshold I have now crossed in internet land that I have a degree of notoriety."
Mm. Hmm. It's interesting because I don't know if I have still felt that threshold personally. I am still kind of in a state of wow, you know? If if somebody reaches out, it is not because I have ever felt that I've crossed a threshold. I think it's still each case is this surge. I feel like a surge of gratitude, like and and joy, like because I am just because there are so many people that I admire, and after creating for a period of time, I also can see how much sacrifice it can take in terms of your time and in terms of your headspace. And I don't necessarily see it as sacrifice, but it is a concerted effort that you have to sustain over a long period of time. And so I have even greater respect for anyone who's doing it at a large scale, anyone who is doing it alone, not necessarily as a solopreneur, but just someone who doesn't have a team behind them. I have even more respect, and it's not that I have less respect for someone who has a team. It's just the amount of different moving parts that you have to manage. So for anyone to still kind of be impressed or send me a note or something to that effect, I'm still kind of not really at a place where I'm like, I made it, I don't know if that's probably a psychological thing. You'd know better than I would about that. But yeah, I don't think I've ever felt that. Even when somebody messages or asks, for to collaborate together or something, or messages to work on a project together, something to that effect, it's always still um, I think I just still feel this like tremendous gratitude to be able to be doing this kind of work. Um, you know, there is also like, funny enough, there's also I think I have an opposite feeling. I have like this when somebody reaches out, I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, I hope I don't disappoint them. Like like it's not like, yeah, yeah, you would reach out to me. No, it's more like it's more like, oh man, I hope that whatever I do end up creating for this person, or in any other case, like even on a podcast like this, I'm like, oh man, Corey's really cool. I don't want to disappoint him on this podcast. But yeah, so I don't think I've reached that threshold personally, but yeah, again, I don't know if that's just a self-awareness thing or what.
Well, I mean, one, you're not a cocky prick, right? I think that goes a long way. This is one of the reasons I love you, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show. But like, because you are an incredibly like humble, but also very genuine, very compassionate kind of guy, and I think that definitely helps temper all of that because fame can definitely go to your head, right? For sure. And we've all met people where you like on camera or on the internet, they seem super cool. But then as soon as you meet him, you're like, this person's an asshole, right? Like, fuck this guy. Um, you're not that kind of guy. But like because I forget how we met. Um, may have been was it something to do with writing? I don't even remember how we
Yes,
met.
yeah, it was
Okay.
writing. It was Lawrence. Lawrence was our
Thinking of
glue.
stories.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So I think so we met and I was like, oh, it's PJ. PJ is cool. I like what he does, like how he thinks, personality wise, seems cool. And then I think like later, I like saw your Instagram. I was like, oh shit, like PJ's got like 100, 200,000 followers. Like, fuck, like, okay, like PJ's legit with, with this creative shit. Because I think I had only seen you on like the newer or the smaller audience, like writing stuff, right? And then I was like, oh, this is what PJ does. Like, oh, okay. Hey, real quick. If you want even more psychological insights to transform your business, your life, and yourself, check out the Creator Alchemy newsletter. New issues go out regularly and it's completely free to join. Go to creatoralchemy.com now, and as a thank you for subscribing, you'll unlock the Psychology of Success Masterclass, which is designed to help you build the foundations you need to succeed in life and business. It's based on strategies and insights I've developed over the years that have already helped countless creators all over the world do just that. So I'd love to send it to you too. Just go to creatoralchemy.com to get the newsletter and unlock the first lesson. All right, now back to the show. When it comes to like imposter syndrome, right? Because you've touched on it a little bit before, and then just now you were saying like I don't want to disappoint people, right? Um, one of the things that I think holds a lot of people back at various stages in their creator journey, especially early on. That's the point most people think imposter syndrome is concentrated, and they for some reason think it just magically goes away, um, which isn't true for most people. But to me, imposter syndrome fundamentally is a belief that you don't belong in the room. It's sort of there's this thought of like, who am I to do this, right? Or this question of like, who do you think you are? How do you navigate that feeling or that thought that pops up?
Yeah, it's funny. I had a very real, and I think I texted you during this. I had a very real moment where I literally was feeling those things. I was literally in a room where I did not belong. I remember messaging you and I was like, "Man, how do you navigate this?" So I don't know if I have a clear path that I can walk through whenever I experience this, but in that moment and in the hours and days as I try to digest that experience, in those moments, what kind of got me through it was kind of a little bit of a mental gymnastics that I don't belong yet. And and then that kind of sounds like, okay, well, I've accepted the fact that I am an imposter, but it's more that I used it as a fuel of sorts, that what I'm doing, what's interesting about, and I guess to get a little bit more specific, like what's interesting about the work that I do is it's really easy for it to feel like fluffy, uh, feel good, you know, just fluff, right? Okay, well, yeah, you need to grow. Okay, great. This is what progress is. Great. So I started to think, okay, maybe it's because the stuff that I'm creating, I remember at that time, like in that moment, I was thinking maybe the stuff I'm creating just is feels too generic. Maybe it feels like it's actually stuff that has no substance. And so very specifically in that moment, I remember thinking, then this is just a sign that maybe I need to focus or refocus back on trying to create more meaningful work, at least to me. Um, the funny thing though is that, and this is something I've talked to with a few other creators about, is I'm not sure I have a great way to navigate it, but I do find myself, and I don't like this particular thing. Like I don't like this particular feeling, which is I think why, which is what kind of gets me past the imposter syndrome kind of like threshold, is like, no, 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 I don't like this. Let's refocus my efforts on what I can control, which is my output, which is my creativity, which is my process, which is helping my students, that kind of thing. It's more like a redirect of my attention versus like, this is how I get past it. It's more like a shifting of the flashlight to a different part of the room. And I remember feeling this like, oh, I want to be in these circles. Like, these circles are in this room talking to each other. I want to be part of that circle, but I feel like I'm not. And what I started finding myself asking is, why do I want to be part of that circle? Why specifically? Obviously, I want to talk to cool people and interesting people, but there's a lot of cool and interesting people. Why is it this particular group? And it is, I'm embarrassed to say, like in my head, I was thinking it's a status thing. I don't, but I don't really care about status. But in this context, in this room, I did. And so, and I realized that desire to be at a specific status, yet falling short of being in that particular status, that gap is where there is this feeling of imposter syndrome. And so I just that awareness alone was helpful. And again, the redirect to being like, this is not even something I really want. And being aware, like you do feel these things, and then you realize, okay, but do I really want this thing? I kind of don't. Then why am I feeling these like emotions of inadequacy? And just like kind of walking through that process, stepping on all the different stones to the right direction, that redirect, I think, to again remembering like this is not the direction I want to be going in. I rather point my attention in this other direction. That kind of helped me navigate that space. But I don't know if I ever found a mental hack to just get past that feeling. It's more just okay for me in particular because output is so important to me. Um, just the process is so important to me. If I can just stay focused on that, that helps me have not have enough space for those feelings because I'm taking up that space with something that is far more important. And in filmmaking, there's this really cool concept which is called a visual vacuum. And basically, what it means is, if you think of a frame, imagine like a movie frame, and this is done like in horror films a lot. So you have a character on one side of the frame, and there's all this empty space behind them, and the audience is expecting something to enter into that space, and that's called the visual vacuum because because that space is empty, it wants to be filled with something. And so I think of that analogy in this context that if I don't fill that empty space myself, there's this vacuum that ends up sucking in all these unwanted things that I don't want in that space. So, imposter syndrome, feelings of inadequacy, fear of failure, perfectionism, and so on. But if I fill it with something that I intentionally want, then there's nothing to be afraid of. No monster is going to pop in there. So that's kind of the way I kind of like mentally imagine that navigation.
I remember a while back somebody who I had, looked up to and followed for years. They ended up following me back. So I was like, oh, I can DM this person. That's insane. And trying to, just convey my level of gratitude to the person. I was like, hey, you've kind of been an idol of mine for a while. Thank you so much. Da, da, da. And the response was like, don't idolize me. I'm just a person.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, don't put me on a pedestal. I
Yeah.
am just a person. And I was
Yeah.
like, one, that's so fucking good, but also like, my bad. Maybe a different way to say that is like, you've been an inspiration to me. They're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's cool. There you go.
Yeah.
And like, granted, that's kind of, just part of the personality, but it was just like immediately like, don't idolize me. Like, maybe that is the language maybe you don't put as much stock in that word, but don't do that to me because I'm just a regular fucking person who just so happens to do this thing over here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a really good lesson, kind of backed up by every time I so when you are physically in a room with somebody, their follower count doesn't magically pop up over their head, right?
Right, right,
Like in your head, you'd be like, "Oh, this person, like they've got this many people," right?
right.
But that's a you thing. Like when you meet somebody who is a celebrity, virtually at any level, right? Because obviously at the high levels, they've got like an entourage and shit. That is, it'll be a little bit different. But quote unquote regular types of celebrities or niche celebrities, when you meet them, they're just a regular fucking person. Like they're just a person, right? Because even again, like with you, for example, like with your again niche level of fame, right? Because over 400K, over 400,000 people in the world know who the fuck you are, and like you enough to have followed along, right? Because obviously more people have seen it, things. And a lot of people may not even like know your face necessarily, but they know your aesthetic, right? They know the visual metaphors and things that you do. But like, when you and I go out to coffee or something, it's just like, this is just my friend PJ. Like that's it, right? This isn't Milani Creative, whatever, right? This is PJ. And I think that's something that really adds to like the intimidation factor and the imposter syndrome aspect that a lot of us as individuals feel when we think about entering a room where there are all these other people. Because it's like, well, they belong here. I don't. Or they've done all these things. I haven't. Or they've got, because, when you have 400,000 followers, it's like, okay, well, this other guy's got 4 million.
Yeah,
This other
right.
guy's got 40 million, right? There's always something else, right? Or yeah, he has, this many, but it's in this niche, or this many people know him, or he's a best-selling author. Like there's always some kind of comparison game, right? And I think that makes it really hard to connect sometimes because you as a person are trying to connect to your ideal of who you think this other person is, right? Matthew McConaughey was on Ryan Holiday's podcast, and he was talking about be less impressed, be more involved. And I really like that because he's like, look, too many people just try to impress everybody. They think, oh, like, almost like you're compensating. I'm like, oh, you're this big, famous person. You're this big, whatever. I need to impress you so you like me too. Versus, how can I just connect with you on a human level? Because that's what you are. You're just a fucking person, right? And I think that once you've had those interactions a few times, you're like, oh, okay, this is how it usually goes. But until you do, it's really easy to idolize people and think they are this perfect version, that maybe that is the version you see because we typically only post our best shit online,
Mhm,
or a more manicured version of ourselves,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And I think that really, really exacerbates the whole imposter syndrome thing. But also, it's like, okay, I have imposter syndrome because I believe I don't belong in this room. I believe all these other people are way better than me in some way. Therefore, the only way for me to earn the right to enter this room is to be perfect or create something perfect.
Mm,
So like there's this relationship between imposter syndrome and perfectionism, because it's like once I am perfect or once I have created something perfect, my imposter syndrome will go away because I will be perfect. I will deserve to be in this room. But the reality is that never fucking happens. How do you think about that yourself, and between both your high school students, but also students in the cohorts you run and things? How do you navigate this or think about it?
yeah, I think you nailed it in terms of there's this difference between, like, what's cool and what's meaningful. Like, "Oh, this was a cool thing. This was a cool interaction, and this was a meaningful interaction." And sometimes it's cool, like, to get a message from someone that you idolize and that you admire. It's also really meaningful when you get a message from someone who says, "Wow, this particular post really helped me get through this." And that is just really the the name of the game. Like that's the whole point. And I think reminding myself and reminding my students, like what we're trying to do is not necessarily do this until it's easy. It's not necessarily that we're trying to do this until we hit some kind of quality threshold and surpass that in the actual content of our work. But what we're really trying to do is get to a place where we align our actions with what feels meaningful and fulfilling. And if we can get to that place, then that's the game. And I in my high school with my high school students, the funny thing is, like I have 3 rules for my high school students for their projects. So my advanced kids, they come in and I pretty much allow them to have full creative reign in terms of what they create. But I have 3 rules. And the first one of those rules is it has to be meaningful to them. And that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like dramatic or it has to be some gut wrenching, vulnerable thing that they're creating. It just needs to be meaningful to them. If they want to make people laugh because that's how they feel fulfillment, then that's fine. It has to be meaningful, has to be collaborative, and lastly, it has to be polished. And that's or at least polished to the best of our ability. So those are our 3 rules, and we keep it simple, and that is how we run. And it's the same with my cohort students in thinking in visual metaphors, in that we are really trying to create work that is that basically practices and exercises our muscle to feel in a state of flow. And like create I kind of equate creativity with flow, and I equate flow with presence. And so I don't know, mindfulness and whatnot. That's been my way of being mindful in what we're in life, which is getting into a state of flow where you're just like 100% present in what you're doing. And I think that is, I think being able to just find that thread, because there's all this little stuff, like there's all these different threads that are just constantly moving around, and all the feelings and emotions that you're feeling as you're trying to navigate, especially the online space. What you need to do is just find one thread that gives you value, gives you meaning in the practice that it is that you're doing. And that thread can be different. Like you can take this thread, sew it into something, and then take another thread out of here and like, okay, this is now meaningful for me. And that can change as you progress. But that is kind of what, again, I think is the holy grail in terms of the practice that you're doing, is just trying to remember that sometimes what's cool is not always meaningful, and trying to remember that even though if something feels hard, that doesn't mean that we should try to find a way around it, because sometimes the most challenging things are the most fulfilling things. So we want to kind of lean into those things, and just kind of remembering those kind of like um, guidelines, I guess, or values rather, can help navigate all these different things that you just touched on.
So related to that, another piece. Okay, so and we'll get more into like creativity and creative expression and shit, but like on a foundational level, a lot of people might have a lot of ideas. They might find a lot of things meaningful. They may want to create content around multiple topics, but it can be overwhelming, right? Because it's like, what medium do I pick? Like, do I, do I use Procreate to make things? Do I use, Adobe Illustrator? Do I use Canva? Okay, well, that's one route, but what if I want to write? What if I want to make music? What kind of music? What things do I write about? How do I find my niche of one, or my personal monopoly, or my whatever the fuck other term we're going to come up with, of like the Venn diagram that is so many circles that eventually the overlap is just you, nobody else does that. How do I say something unique, right? That because there's almost like this survivorship bias thing, I guess, where we only see the current version of everybody else's business or creative expression. we don't see all the iterations. Sometimes there are like breadcrumbs, right? So not necessarily for this exact thing, but one of the things I like to do anytime I start to feel like intimidated or inadequate with my writing is I will go back and look up some of my favorite writers' early writing.
Mm.
And I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, okay, this wasn't dog shit, but it is dog shit compared to their current writing,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, I'm comparing myself, X number of years in to somebody who's been around for 20, 30 years. Let me look at where they were at when they were 2 or 3 years in, right?
Mhm.
That can be super helpful. But another thing with that is we see their current version and what they have decided to focus on. And even like you yourself today, you talked about how like you started off writing
Mhm.
and then you decided to move into, visual metaphors and things. And now you're back to writing as well, supported by all this other stuff. Um, but it's overwhelming for a lot of people
Yeah.
because it's like I have so many ideas, I have so many passions. I'm a multi-potentialite, whatever the fuck the term is. I have so many
Multi-passionate.
things.
Yeah.
Well, I have multiple passions, but I also have so much potential. There's like they call themselves like Renaissance people or multi-potentialites or some shit. But
Mhm.
there's also multi-passionates, there's multi-hyphenates, all this other fucking shit. Everybody's trying to be Da Vinci. So like or like a founding father of like your 15 things, which is what most creators are. It's like, I'm a writer, YouTuber, podcaster, course creator, coach, consultant, whatever, myself included. I'm not talking shit on everybody else. I'm talking shit on myself. But like, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
How do you help people navigate that? Or how do you think about it yourself?
Yeah. Uh, I remember very similarly to you, I have to remind myself, first off, especially because I went through all that. Like, and sometimes I still kind of go through that. It's not like as you build some quote unquote notoriety on or develop some kind of niche fame that the opportunities stop. In fact, it becomes more challenging as you do more and more opportunities pop up. And it's infinitely harder to stay focused because any one of those opportunities could potentially lead to something meaningful, but it can also distract you from the one thing that you are already doing well. So it doesn't necessarily get easier. So you have to have some kind of foundational belief that kind of helps guide you through some of these and again helps you kind of carve the path and stay on the path. And it's again, it doesn't get easy, but I remind myself that one, and I share this with my students, that it's really easy to take a look at someone like Tim Ferriss or even Ali Abdaal and look at their work and see how many different directions they are, talking about different contents, different they're talking about financial wealth. They're talking about playing the guitar. Tim Ferriss has all these wide ranging people like psychedelics and talking about writing and art. And it's just all over the place. But as you say, that is not where they started. Like Tim Ferriss was a productivity guy, but he wrote a book, 4 Hour Work Week, that was primarily about redefining how we work, redefining how we think about retirement, and redefining how we are attacking wealth. He talked about new wealth and all these different concepts in this 4 Hour Work Week book that then catapulted him to being where he is now. Eventually, he started a podcast, and that has led him to where he is today. But that is not where he started. Ali Abdaal, probably one of the most niche people that I could think of, started with content on how to get into med school in Cambridge. Like that is a pretty niche thing. Like not everyone wants to get into med school in Cambridge, right? He then expands So I kind of sometimes think, especially for those who are multi-passionate or multi-potentialites, I don't know, that it's important to remember sometimes, there's a term, like niching down, but I kind of think of niching up, like you start here and then you expand out. And that's just a more visual way for me to think about it. Um, but I also like to help my students navigate some of this. I share my first, 50 plus visuals. And that is a great way to help people realize, oh, my work may not be as bad because when looking at the first like even 12 pieces that I ever created, they're very different looking than what I create now. And it is really easy to see the progression. It is really easy to see, okay, this is an improvement from where you started. And I kind of think back to, I don't know who said this, but like if you're not embarrassed by your work that you did like a year ago, you haven't really, grown that much. And so like you should feel like a sense of, oh wow, that was not as good as maybe I as my taste has grown since. And so um yeah, I think that's kind of been really really helpful for me to just remind myself of those things. One is just that everyone starts at a very smaller scale and then they expand up. And I think that's why it's so important that you develop your own metrics of success, you develop your own measures of success, especially early on. Because first off, Instagram, you mentioned when you first came across my Instagram channel, like, oh, all of a sudden I had like 100,000, whatever. I started on Twitter. Like that was where I started posting. And when I first started on Instagram, and that was as a recommendation by my friend Yanis Oslins, he was like, who's another visual creator. And he's like, you know what, you should be posting your work on Instagram. And I was like, okay. So I started posting some stuff on Instagram. Nothing, no response. Like, meaning if I had started posting my visuals on Instagram and only Instagram, I don't know if I would have had enough external validation to think this was a thing or there should be any interest in continuing to post on there. Nothing. Like, I mean, I would post, no response. And yeah, obviously, I was posting on my own personal account. My friends would maybe say, "Oh, cool." But it wasn't until like I don't know how many visuals I created that some of my friends were like, "Wait, did you write? Did you make these?" And I was like, "Yeah, those are the ones I made." And I remember even telling Yanis, I was like, "Man, no one seems to care on Instagram." He's like, "Dude, you just got to understand that every platform is different. Just keep going." And I was like, "Okay." And it was about 2 months in posting daily on Instagram. And it was literally like this hockey stick graph. It was like flat, and then something happened in 2 months. It wasn't a very specific post that did it, but all of a sudden, I was like, oh, what's going on? Boop. And then all of a sudden, the next post went, boop, what is going on? Boom. And it just like took off. All of a sudden, Instagram recognized what I was doing. And again, it was another reminder. It's like what happened on Twitter with this thread that I made around my birthday that went viral. It was this, what happened on Instagram was another reminder that it wasn't necessarily the quality of the work. It was the packaging, it was the algorithm, it was so many different variables that are outside of my control. But the only thing that was in my control is my regular posting and just having some kind of faith and also believing in a different measure of success, which is the reps. And so I think when it comes to this overwhelming feeling that you have, like all the different things that you can do, you have to find the one thing that makes you feel alive, that makes you feel joy, that makes you have some kind of, again, going back to this meaningful, fulfilling kind of practice. It's kind of like, when we were sitting down over coffee and you told me initially, you're like, you know what? I freaking realized what I love doing. I love having cool conversations with cool people And that is what I'm going to focus on. And that's why I'm going to do a podcast. And I was like, hell yeah. Like you realize that is what is like, regardless of what happens with this podcast, which I have no doubt is going to go amazing. But regardless of what happens, you're having fun and you're enjoying it and you're making meaningful connections, deepening the connections that you already have. And you're going to win at the end of the day just because of that alone. That's the game. And just remembering the game. Remembering the game is not how many, it's not the number of downloads. It's not, yes, all of those are important to keep track of. Again, you need some external validation. But if you don't have the foundation of why you're doing the thing, then it can be really, really damaging to your long-term creative health, because yes, it's overwhelming all the things you can do. And if I was, normally people come to me when they're thinking, okay, well, I want to do visuals. Okay. But at the same time, as they start and they start building some traction, they're like, oh, now I should also post on YouTube. Now I should also like have a podcast. And now I should also, each one of those things is a tremendous undertaking. And I think part of that overwhelm comes because we compare ourselves as individuals to other individuals who have teams and they're everywhere. And you think, oh, this person can do everything. But no, they're not doing it alone. And I think just reminding yourself, for me, like what I do is I remind myself that it's just me. And until or unless I want to have a team, then that is not something that's within the cards for me. So I have to be far more discretionary. Like I really need to be far more discerning of how I'm going to devote my time and energy. Um, and I encourage other folks who are feeling overwhelmed to just again find those threads that are gonna give you value, meaning this regardless of what the metrics of success that you might see on the algorithm, you have to find your own measure of success, so that you can again stay focused on it.
What are some of your measures of success or the metrics you think about?
The check, the fact that I did it, the fact that I showed up, that is like, and that may sound like pretty cliche and generic, but that is 100% it. Like I I gave myself an arbitrary, here's one way I kind of keep myself going, right? These are small little things that I do. So I was off for a week, and so I was like, all right, for 7 days I had a goal for making 100 visuals. I didn't make it, I didn't reach it, but I did hit 50 something, 54 visuals in 7 days. And each one of those days was a lot of fun. And I think of just showing up, just, I did it today. It's kind of like, it's like working out, like you can't think that the goal was to work out and I made it. The goal is to keep working out. The goal is not to hit some kind of virality. Like, and I think maybe that's why when I look back on that moment when, my first viral post happened, like I was like, oh, this doesn't feel like anything. Like I thought this would be a lot more meaningful than it is. It's not that I wasn't grateful for it. It's just that I was like, oh, I need to really be careful here. Like it was a signal to me that I this should not be the goal, because this doesn't feel like I've I've accomplished something. It just feels like a cool thing. And so but every time I show up, like it's just like showing up in the morning to get your exercise in, and you're like, all right, now I can face the day feeling like I've gotten something meaningful done. And I found that just the ambient benefit of continuing to show up daily compounds in other respects, oftentimes in how I'm able to articulate what it is that I'm thinking to, you know, my kids, my students. And so just staying focused on that, and also being able to say to my students who are high school students, they even say how. I remember one of my students said to me, "How do you continue making so much stuff?" And I was just like, "Because I just focus on that." Like, I yes, I do lose out on certain things, meaning like I may not engage as much. So the algorithm loves engagement. I may not necessarily go online and like engage as actively as I would like, but that's because I'm using that time for the practice. And yes, it may not make me as I may not get as many followers as a result of that, but I would rather just continue to improve and make meaningful work, at least meaningful to me. And it's for me, it's like, oh, here's another way I can articulate that. Oh, here's another texture to this idea. Oh, here's another perspective to this idea. Here's another way that I can present that idea that might resonate with a different audience that this didn't initially resonate with. And that to me is where, again, I find success in that. It's not necessarily a quantifiable metric, but it's more of a check or an X on it. And I just keep liking, I keep wanting to hit another check for the day.
So I think that is a really important piece. So like I'm so glad you had the prop to show because people it's really easy for people to be like, "Oh, I can just, spend 3 days creating a single visual and that's good." I'm not saying it isn't early on, but when you look at people who are true like craftsmen, they have to kind of echo the story you brought up earlier. They have so many fucking pots that they've made that month or that whatever, right? It's like quantity fuels quality, right? It's you have to have so many reps, so many iterations, so many practices to have anything really of merit. But also, especially like in this, this in the creator space, you never if you're consistently publishing, you never know which thing is going to take off. And I don't mean in the algorithm, virality shit, engineered virality. I mean what is going to resonate with people. And like I had heard this, early-ish on, it was like, basically for every 100 things you create, one might pop off. Most people focus on trying to like preemptively identify what that one thing could be, and then they focus on that one thing. But you can't know that. Like, and that number 1 to 3 holds true for me too. Because like a lot of what I do is more longer form. It does take longer, that kind of thing. Um, but on average, for every 100 pieces I've published, 2 to 3 tend to take off. And the issue is, I would never have been able to tell you which ones they would have been because
Mhm.
the ones I would have put my money on
Yeah.
typically weren't the ones that popped off.
Yeah.
The ones that like I spent way too much time like doing research or like putting all these fucking practical takeaways of prompts and exercises, make it like super practical, not nearly as effective. Or if they were, nobody told me, right? They didn't resonate with them enough that they were like, "Hey, Corey, this is fucking great." Versus the things that like I just shit out in a day because I was fucking pissed off about something. I'm like, I'm going to channel that. Yeah, I'm just going to riff. I'm going to channel this. I'm not going to bitch, but I'm going to channel my frustrations into something productive. Or it's just like, hey, there's not necessarily like a big takeaway for this. This is just something I've observed, something I've experienced, whatever. Like, um, like one piece I talked about early ish on was basically my struggles or my sort of identity development around choosing to lose my accent when I left home to go to college.
Mm.
Um, basically, it's called like voices of the mountains because like I'm from up a holler, like I'm from West Virginia. I'm from a town nobody's heard of unless you're from the town, and um, like where I'm from, there's an R in wash. It's wash. Hand me a washcloth, right? Like that's the level that I'm from. Um, But I remember growing up and I was like, every time I've ever seen an entrepreneur or a doctor, they don't sound like me. So I thought if I was going to succeed and become whatever, I had to lose my accent because successful people don't sound like me. So at late high school, early college, I was like, I am going to put dedicated effort into losing my hick accent. And I did for a while. Obviously, it's come back. Um, but the sort of the point of the article was like, there was a point where I was at a fraternity party, and every so I haven't drank since I was like 17, and I'm 36. So like any story I ever tell, I'm sober. But I was at a fraternity party, and basically everybody else there was to some degree of inebriated, and suddenly everybody's accents came out because it was like there was a room full of people who didn't really have accents.
Yeah.
Suddenly everybody's came out, and then we all realized like, fuck, we've all done the same thing. We've all thought we had to like have like a fucking newscaster accent or some shit to be successful. But
Mm,
actually your accent doesn't determine your success. Like your accent is a part of you. And a thing that I realized was that like all the things I love come with my accent. So by trying to disconnect from my accent, I've disconnected from all the things that I love because I attributed all those things with ignorance and things. And it's just like I lost my identity when I tried to lose my accent. So like reconciling that, coming to terms with like, and I kind of end the piece with like, look, my name is Dr. Corey Wilks. I'm an entrepreneur and I say y'all. And like just coming back to that of like, this actually is a strength for me, not a weakness, not a character flaw, not a sign of ignorance. Because if people think I'm ignorant because of the way I talk, fuck them. And there wasn't like there weren't like here are journal prompts for you to think about your identity. Right? It was just like this is just a fucking story that I feel like I need to share because I hope one day somebody like a younger version of me can come across this
mm.
and that'll give them the permission to be themselves and succeed. People loved it. It was great. I'm like, this was just me riffing because of whatever. And you can't know what is going to resonate unless you hit publish. And I think that's goes back to perfectionism, man. Like so many people think like, okay, I have 100 ideas, 100 things I could do. Let me spend the next 3 fucking weeks prioritizing which one I should pursue.
Right, right,
But then you're like, look, in less than a week, I've come up with 50 plus visuals. I don't, they're all good enough.
right.
Good enough, right?
Mhm.
It would take most other people a month or more to come up with 50 pieces. Not because they don't have anything to say, but because they get in their own way, because they put the quality bar so high, it's virtually unreachable. What is good enough for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about accents, and I was like thinking as you were talking, I was like, oh, I talk about creative accents all the time. And that is one of the
I
things.
literally had that in my notes to talk about, so go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's so they kind of connect in a weird, funny way that on the first hand, there's this idea of what is good and whether or not we are the best judges of what is good and what is not. And also, what's interesting is your impact is sometimes not felt until far later. Like a lot of times, I think social media has kind of spoiled us in some ways because we see immediate impact and we think that is it, period, done. And I think back even further, like Edgar Allan Poe died without knowing that his work would be celebrated for centuries after he passed away. Emily Dickinson, like they were beautiful artists that never felt the impact in their lifetime of their work. And I think of this song from Lonely Island. I don't know if you're familiar with the band. It's like they have a lot of spoof songs, but they have one song that I think really resonates with this idea, which is "Cool guys don't look at explosions." And it's like, I kind of think about that image every time I post something that I think is good enough. It's like I just create an explosion. I'm just like walking away from it. Like I don't care anymore. Like the work is out into the world. How people will react to it is no longer in my hands. Cool guys don't look at explosions. Like that's the way I kind of like frame it in my mind, in my thinking. And the reason that is also important is like when we're talking about like accents and like celebrating your accents, your imperfections, the good enough aspect of it is part of your accent, is part of your creative accent. And I think, especially in this age, especially as we're watching everything happen now with AI, with especially in the last just week and a half, where these crazy breakthroughs are continuing to make at least some creators feel uneasy. And not just creators, coders. I mean, everyone in the world is starting to feel more and more uneasy about just how much AI is able to do, how perfect it can create certain things. And when we look at Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, you don't have to go very far to see an AI image pop up. And I think that's why today creative accents are more important than ever. And what is a creative accent? Like to me, I think of a creative accent as how you specifically create something imperfectly. Like when you draw a circle, you may not draw it perfectly, but the way that you draw that circle is unique to you. And when we look at kids, if you go into I have two young kids, if you go into an elementary classroom and you take a look at every student's work, you will see every single one of them look a little bit different. And they are charming because of that. Like the fact that they may make a triangle for a face versus an oval, the fact that it doesn't look realistic is what makes it stand out. And I think in this specifically, this AI world where everyone is just saying, oh, my own work is actually not as pretty as something AI can do. So I rather put an AI piece. And I'm like, the fact that your work is not pretty is exactly why you should put that instead of AI, because that's what's going to make it stand out. I think I was writing a post earlier today, and I remember writing things that didn't sound great, like great copy. It just sounded like somebody writing, like like almost. There were points where I was like, should I just change this? And I was like, no, actually, I want this to sound. I've been reading too much stuff that sounds like AI. I don't want this to sound perfect. I want this to sound human. I want this to have my voice in it. So I left imperfections in there instead of like trying to edit it out and try to wordsmith something perfectly uh, like mic dropping in there. And so I kind of think of all these things building into, like, I think the way you do something, how imperfect you do something, how imperfectly you create something is part of your creative accent. And there is something about that now that I think people want to see. I maybe about a month and a half ago on just like a random impulse, I just drew something on a sheet of paper, put Milani Creative on top of it, and posted the raw drawing on Twitter, and it did really well. Like people were like, "I love seeing this. Like I love seeing this analog version." And yeah, okay, it may not have my brand colors. Maybe like somebody else could take it, and it's no longer Milani Creative, but I think there's something to that now in today's world where we want to see these imperfections. We want, and I think they're to be celebrated. I think of Alex Hermosi. I think of his work. Someone who could hire anyone he wanted to make his own visuals. Like, I mean, the dude's a multimillionaire, right? But if you look at any of his writing, They all have like amazing visual thinking because he tries to break things down simply through his visuals. And they are stick figures and they are quirky. They don't look pretty, but it is because of that that they have character. It is because of that that people actually like it. So I kind of think through this whole idea of what being something being good enough, something this whole idea of, you know, whether or not we are the best judges of our own work. All of that is kind of wrapped into this idea that we should really celebrate the imperfections in our work. And because of that, when it's time to say this is good enough, it's time to share it. Now, I do have a certain there is for me like taking a step back, like if I'm to be more practical, like if I'm really giving an actual tip, like when I'm looking at a visual, like what actually makes it good enough for me is if the idea is clear. If the idea is clear, maybe the execution is imperfect, then I will still share it. If the idea feels unclear to me, then I think it might still need work. But I'm not trying to get it to be perfect. I'm just trying to make sure that it makes sense because I still want to respect my audience's time. I don't want them to just, you know, I'm like, oh, well, this is all about me and me getting in my rep. I still am thinking about my audience because I do believe there's a difference between creating for yourself and creating for an audience. And you want to respect your audience's time in some level, but you don't want it to be such a paralyzing force in your approach to sharing your work. I want it to be clear. I want it to be something that feels like an insight of some sort. And as long as I can check those two boxes, then I think it's worth sharing because I think of that as a version one. And I continue to think of, you know, you may have heard of this idea of um, creating in public or building in public. And I kind of think of every work that I personally post, and I try to share this with my students, is that you are perfecting in public. Like your iteration is gonna be visible, and that's okay. Like meaning 3 months from now, you will improve it, but you have to close the loop. A lot of times you cannot see the full circle until you've closed the loop. So you got to make sure to finish it so that you can actually take a look at it from a more third party kind of perspective. And you can only do that when you take a few steps away and it's shared with the world. Sometimes it's not until literally it's like immediately after you hit publish, you realize that's what I should have done. That's what I should have fixed on that. And you're like, all right, well, you know, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, I will create another version of this, and that will be what I improve on.
Yeah, because like there's the spotlight effect, right? Where we assume just because we are aware of what we're doing, everybody else is too. So it's like, oh, I can't repeat myself, or oh, this is the only way this can ever exist, right? It's like, no, in 3 months, even people who saw it the first time, either they will have forgotten or they will appreciate the reminder, right? How much of creativity and specifically creative expression comes down to technical ability versus psychology?
Mm. I think if we have a narrow definition of creativity, it ends up becoming far more technical than it really is. Meaning, like, if we narrowly define creativity in the context of art, in the context of the traditional arts specifically, like music, drawing, um, even filmmaking, then we might start to think, I am either creative or I am not. And that I don't believe is a useful definition for anyone who is not building in some kind of creative habit into their life. And I really truly to my heart, to my core, believe that a creative practice is something that is valuable in everyone's life. And that shape, the shape of that creative practice can be different based on what it is that you do. Like if we expand the definition of creativity, then I think when we're thinking about the psychology of creativity, then we can tap into some of the value that a creative practice can provide us in our lives. As an example, like even when I wasn't creating visuals, like as a teacher, like I remember still getting value from trying to creatively solve problems in the classroom or in a lesson. A lot of people think and confuse what teaching is with instruction. Like, teaching is not instruction. Instruction is a part of teaching, but it's not teaching alone. Like, that's not the only thing. That's not the only block that is what teaching is. There's a lot more that goes into it. And so you have to troubleshoot a lot of uh, cognitive and mental and psychological blocks that happens with students, and each student is different. You want to meet students where they are. You want to differentiate instruction. You want to do all these different things for each student. You want to try to think about when you present something and all those different things. These are like, you're trying to like imagine, if you've ever watched Minority Report, like imagine like you have the you got all these different things that you're moving around, right? And there is creative problem solving that happens in that. I think of lawyers, like you're creatively trying to solve problems when, as a psychologist, and you have someone that's in front of you who is suffering, and you have to think of a creative approach to not just tell them what the solution is, but to help them come to that solution themselves. That is the game. And so you have to be creative in that. And so I think when you expand the definition of creativity, you can start to see, oh, first off, I am being creative, and to lean into that and to think, how can I get better at that? And I don't necessarily have to define it just in this close little, small little definition of just the arts. On a technical level, like, yes, there is an interesting additional kind of framework to kind of think about this, is that whenever, like on a more practical level, like whenever you're trying to learn a new skill, and you're trying to like, okay, think about how can I be creative in this new skill as well. Like initially, everyone wants to be far more ahead than they're capable of doing immediately, right? We all want to be where we kind of like, Ira Glass has this great piece, very short little piece, on the difference between like your taste and your ability, and there is always a gap, and the only way to bridge that gap is through a lot of work. And beginners usually don't understand this. Like, what your taste is not where you start. So you have to, and you're going to be very frustrated as long as you are in that gap, but you just have to remember that you have to get in the reps to get there. But when I think about like the difference between technical and like the psychology, I kind of think about the science and the art. And so every skill has a science to it, that you have to learn the science first before you can learn the art. And Bruce Lee has one of my favorite quotes of all time, which is, learn the rules, master the rules, break the rules. And there's a Japanese like parallel to that, which is shu ha ri. And I think it's in martial arts as well, that it's, you have to know what to do so that you know when not to do that thing. And that's the art form. But you have to learn the science first. So that's the technical side of things. So there is a technical proficiency that you have to build. Like a teacher, you have to know all the different things that you have to do as a teacher first before you can start to creatively problem solve, when you can blur the lines, or when you can step over this line, and when you can break the rules here and whatnot. And so I kind of I kind of like to relate it back to this story. When I first met my wife, I met my wife salsa dancing, and it was the very first salsa class I ever went to, and it really was like one of those moments where like she's kind of like walking towards my group of friends, and like, slow motion, like she had a ponytail, like swinging back and forth. And I was just like, oh my gosh, she is beautiful. And she had this shirt that says the one that got away. And so we're at this like salsa class, and I start watching her dance. And she is like as elegant as you can imagine. Turns out she'd been dancing for 2+ years when I met her. She just happened to show up at this beginner salsa class because of her friend. And I remember in the beginning as a salsa dancing salsa that everyone else was like doing these amazing moves and whatnot, and like it didn't look like any of the stuff I was learning in the beginner class. I'm like, why are they? How are what? That doesn't even look like the 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 steps. Like, why are they stepping on this beat when you're supposed to not step on that beat? I don't understand. Turns out they had already mastered the basic steps so that they knew when to skip a step. I couldn't fast forward that. I couldn't bypass that. I had to. Initially, it was hard for me to understand, though, that I had to learn the basics so that I would know when to not do the basic. And I kind of think about that framework when I think about the science and art of something, when I think about what is the balance that you're trying to do with the technical, like proficiency of something, and then making it look creative. And that I think is something that it's like it is a process. So yeah, that's kind of how I'd like to think about it.
Well, I think especially earlier on, people get too wrapped up in the technical aspects because those are the most easily observed. Like you can see, like, oh, my, drawing is, my ability to draw a hand or to draw figures or to do whatever is getting better. Oh, I'm learning this software, more effectively. Okay. And to a degree, like understanding the medium you're going to use is important. But especially just with the broad definition of art, there are some people. So like one of my friends, she's like an abstract painter. One, I thoroughly do not understand abstract shit.
Hmm. I can't say I do
Um,
either, but
oh, okay, and maybe that's part of the point. But like, I look at her stuff and I'm like, I can vaguely understand that there is a lot of craftsmanship that goes into this because I know for a fact if I just slung paint at a fucking canvas, it wouldn't look as good as yours. But when I compare that to some of the artists that I really enjoy, they're much more detailed, much more realistic, um, and they're fundamentally different. But then there are also people like you or like Jack Butcher, right? We talked about him before. Like Jack's especially is minimal, right? Like it's black and white, very very clean, very little, sometimes if any, even text on it, right? But things that people continue to talk about for years and years afterward, they continue to use those things because he does such a good job of distilling things down, right? Um, that to me is proof that you don't have to get hung up on the technical aspects because, like you said with Hormozy, like you can draw fucking stick figures in a best and your book be a bestseller,
hmm
right? It's about, can you use the tech? Are you technical enough to get your point across? Then the question becomes, how technical do you want to become before you hit a point of diminishing returns relative to what you're actually trying to fucking do, right? Um, like I'll use myself. So Adobe Premiere is a pain in the ass because the learning curve is just insane. Um, but it's what I started learning for editing and things. And at a certain point, because I was inspired by like Peter McKinnon and Becky and Chris and some of the people. I love that aesthetic. Um, and I was trying to emulate that. And then one day I told myself, I was like, I am not trying to be a world class color grader.
mm
I am not trying to be a world class editor. What is good enough to get my point across? Once I hit that good enough, then my focus shifts to the actual, like you said, the ideas, the messaging, and dealing with like the psychological aspects of, am I coming up with an idea that is worth sharing? Am I dealing with my own perfectionism, imposter, or self doubt, whatever? Am I doing that work? Am I finding ideas that will connect with people and resonate with them? Or am I hiding behind, nope, I need to work on this color grading a little bit more before I can do this thing? Or this is a supremely mediocre idea, but it's so fucking pretty because of all the editing I did, right? And I think that, and I'm curious kind of what you have seen in your time, especially when it comes to using visuals. Some people, aesthetically, it's beautiful, but meaning wise, messaging, idea wise, mid, as the kids say. I don't know what the fuck the kids say anymore. I'm officially middle aged at this point. So like, what have you seen when it comes to that? Of like, do people spend too much emphasis or put too much stock in being overly technically proficient to the point that they neglect what actually matters?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what's interesting is on the technical side of things, going back, and I'll use a different word because sometimes it's, when we think of technical, we also think of technology. We think of, the actual nuts and bolts, and we get there is I kind of I would probably use the science of it, right? Um, and focusing on the aesthetics too much. I think the science of visuals in particular is, well, I would say most people spend way too much time thinking that all that encompasses is the aesthetics. Like the most commonly asked question that I get from readers and my audience is, what app are you using to make these? And I understand that question. I understand the impulse to ask that question. It's just an incomplete question because, or rather, there, even if I, and I have no problem answering it, it's just that that is not going to necessarily give you the results that you think it might just by knowing the app. Even if, and we can see it even with AI, like I see a lot more AI visual metaphors, yet there is still something missing in those. And maybe that'll change and maybe change very soon. Who knows? Yet I think the science of a visual is deeper in understanding, like, how do you structure the thinking behind it, and how do you then present that in a way that is meaningful to your reader so that they can process it in an instant and like really kind of take off with it. I think, yes, there's way too much time spent on the aesthetics, a little bit too much time. I think it's a limiting belief even when we focus too much on the tools, because the tools are going to change. And if you look at Jack Butcher's work, to go back to him, a lot of it is, I want to say he did in Illustrator, but he's not using all of the suite in Illustrator. He's using like 3 tools. Like that's like 2% of the software that you need in order to create something. So I find that just on a general level, we don't need a lot of skill in the tools to start. And even with Premiere Pro, like you only needed maybe just a small set of tools, maybe being able to put stuff in the timeline, maybe put in some sound effects, to understand how different layers work. But outside of that, like you will learn as you go and you will continue to build your skill set as you go. I found just, teaching technology and teaching these technical skills over the span of 20 plus years that just in case knowledge is rarely effective, and just in the nick of time is always effective. So it's like, get going. Let me see you. Let me see your form as you're shooting your shot. And as you're shooting the form, I will correct it so that you can shoot the next shot better. And you're getting feedback. Not only are you getting feedback from, whether or not you hit or you miss, but you're also getting feedback as you're doing it from me as your instructor. And so that is far more of an effective approach to improving your skills. One, having like, you know, the just enough. When we're thinking about just enough, we're thinking about just enough on many different levels. Just enough skill in some kind of new tool or whatever it is that you're using to be able to achieve a singular rep. Once you have that, having some kind of feedback mechanism so that you know how to adjust and to expand that where you started from and your skill set as you move forward. And just remembering that if you spent 3-4 hours learning how to color correct and you don't do that like almost every day, then it's just wasted time because you're not really in just like building and that skill into your arsenal of skills. And a lot of people spend way too much time learning too much of the technical side of things before just actually doing the real work.
That and like, we've all heard, constraints, fuel creativity or whatever. But I think I kind of layer deeper than that. With me with YouTube videos and shit, at a certain point, I was like, I'm spending so much time creating a video that is getting like 40 views or something. I hate this process and I'm not even getting the external, metrics. Why do I keep doing this? Because I was spending so much time finding B-roll and sound effects and music and trying to learn what the fuck ducking is when you're trying to like deal with sound and shit. Um, it was too much. I was like, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? What constraints can I apply to my creative process so that I accomplish the thing I'm actually setting out to do? What I'm actually trying to set out to do is convey information that I think is valuable and worth sharing. Could it look prettier? Could every single video be this cinematic masterpiece that I collaborated with Peter McKinnon on, and we're walk around fucking mountains and it's all fucking muted and saturated? Of course, with custom music, that's the fucking dream. But until then, a talking head video with minimal editing, just editing out multiple takes or even just doing a one take, no music, no sound effects, either no B-roll at all or just like a little graphic that pops up, quick fade in and out. That I can commit to doing.
Mm.
That for now, early on, allows me to accomplish the thing I'm actually setting out to accomplish, which is getting more ideas out there. One that helped me a ton, because I was trying to get good at things that didn't matter. Because I was trying to get good at things I thought were supposed to matter or things that I thought I was supposed to want to do. And that was getting in my way. I was getting in my own way about the creative process and what it quote unquote should look like. And also, I'm competing, quote unquote, with people who have full editing teams. I'm competing with professional editors who've done this for 15, 20 years. I like you said, like with Premiere, like I create a couple shortcuts to like ripple delete and shit. And that's basically all I do.
Mm.
Even like with podcast episodes. I will pull like a small clip as like an opener, um, and then I will manually record like an intro, and then the rest is just this, right? Um, that is a constraint that works for me. That allows me to accomplish the thing I'm actually trying to accomplish, rather than getting just lost in the fucking weeds of all the shit that doesn't matter, or learning something like you said just in case. Well, let me learn how DaVinci Resolve works just in case I ever decide to switch over, right? What constraints have you found helpful for you?
Mm. You know, when I first started doing anything online, so when I started a blog and whatnot, my wife asked me, "Why aren't you creating YouTube videos? Like you're a film teacher." And I was like, "Yeah, here's the thing. I knew, just like you've discovered, like I know how much work goes into a singular piece. And the long form format of YouTube, like podcasts and these longer form, even like a 10-minute video, like they are 10-minute films essentially. And it doesn't make it any less work just because it's YouTube. It's still kind of like a short film. And I didn't want early on to have these long feedback cycles, meaning like I spent 3 to 4 weeks on one video to then post it and then learn from that to then take another 3 4 weeks to create another video and so on. So I didn't want that to be my starting point. So I wanted something that had a far shorter feedback iteration cycle, which is why I started with writing, and then visuals kind of became like a perfect format for me. And so the constraint that I kind of created for myself is short feedback cycles. That is like, meaning I want to be able to create something in a day or 2 days that allows me to then finish the rep. That's one. The second creative constraint is the format itself, the frame itself, meaning I've kind of created a contrast for context kind of approach to the visuals that I create. So, meaning I am always comparing two things, maybe three things at most, to try to convey the point. Having that constraint helps fuel creativity. So, like I'm saying, I'm not going to say 50 different things in one visual. You know, a lot of times people will say, I love your infographic. And I understand sometimes, you know, there's different terms for these different things, but I don't consider what I create an infographic. Infographic has a bunch of different things on top of it. And usually it's great as a reference for like, oh, okay, this is something you've already learned. But if you're trying to teach something for the first time, I think of visual metaphors as a singular message and distilled down into one idea. And that is usually presented in like, this is what you could do, or this is what you could do. You know, it's either presenting a problem and a solution. It's saying, hey, maybe you didn't know that this was a problem, but it is. And or saying, hey, maybe you knew that this is the solution. Here's a reminder. Like I'm always trying to present in that kind of framework, in this idea that with this binary kind of thinking, which is not the way most ideas are actually in reality, meaning there is always nuance and like a spectrum of understanding in most things. But if you want to say something meaningful, a lot of times you have to just take a stand. You can't have lukewarm opinions. You have to kind of just suggest, hey, this is the thing. And yes, sometimes it is an exaggerated interpretation of what it is that you're trying to say, but that is kind of the start in the idea of presenting it. And then, you know, maybe in the comments people will have some colorful language to say that's not the way it is, but whatever, that's the point. Like that's just to get us started. So the creative constraints are: one, very tight feedback cycles; number two is just trying to create a frame around this idea that I want to present it in like this or that. What do you think? And that helps in kind of like keeping me focused. And it's like, you know, you have to have a box in order to think outside of one. You have to have constraints in order to be creative. And you have to just force the constraints on yourself. That's kind of the constraints that I keep to. And I don't want to have a bunch of constraints because then that creates a different problem. Just like a couple, 2 to 3 is enough to keep you aligned and keep you productive.
One thing I think about a lot, because So when it comes to like perfectionism and shit, the thing I hear a lot from people is like, oh, I have a really high bar for quality. You are bullshitting yourself because everybody has a high bar for quality. We all have high expectations of ourselves, right? And it's one of these things where like the more capable you become, the higher your expectations also become because you are now more capable,
Mhm.
right? I really struggled to hit publish for a multitude of reasons over the years, but um, one that kept coming back was this isn't good enough. And then I came across this quote, I think it was by Da Vinci, and he said, art is never finished, only abandoned. That was a huge unlock for me because it switched the question I was asking myself. Now I don't ask, is this as good as it can be? I ask, is this as good as I can make it today? And the reason that's different is if I say, is this as good as it can be? No, it can always be better, right?
Mhm.
But if I say, is this as good as I can make it today? I am putting myself in there specifically because I'm saying, relative to my skill level, have I reached that 100% in this? But it also applies the secondary constraint of today because tomorrow I will hopefully be a little bit better. So this could be better if I push it till tomorrow. But then that's a never ending thing. So today, is this as good as I am capable of making it? Sometimes the answer is no, and then I continue to tweak. But as soon as the answer is yes, I personally cannot make this any better. And I personally cannot make this any better within this 24-hour period. That is when I hit publish. That is how I define good enough in my own creative process. Now, I work on a different timeline, right? Like I'm not necessarily trying to create like a whole article or a whole whatever on a day-to-day basis. But given the time constraint I do put on it of like, hey, I got a newsletter issue that's got to go out this week, or hey, I need to this thing's been burning in me, I need to get it out by the end of the week. Whatever constraint there is time wise, those are the questions I think about.
Mm.
What is your reaction to that approach, or just the quote about art is never finished, only abandoned?
Yeah, no, I that's Da Vinci is that guy kind of knew what he was talking about. So I I definitely align with that. Um yeah, I kind of that's kind of where this idea of perfecting in public kind of comes from. You know, Da Vinci was really dope too, that like he would carry around the Mona Lisa, and uh would basically do like 2 or 3 brush strokes on it and then fold it back up, put it back in his, little, duffel bag of art, and then just move on and continue to, like, just add bit by bit on his work. And I kind of think to, some of, like, the most meaningful films, if you listen to the directors talk about their films, they will be tortured by the imperfections in the film, even though the films themselves resonate with millions of people. So these are just examples that the work itself can continue to resonate with people meaningfully, dramatically, and still be imperfect. And we will always have this feeling of we could have done more with them. And I think I like your approach of, is this the best that I can do today? And I think that today part is the most critical component of it. And it's also, again, just gets you past this idea of, well, being paralyzed by what it is that you're where you stop. And also, like, at the same time, it keeps you accountable to your own level of what is good enough. Like, it's not to say that you say everything is fine. It's that you have a certain threshold that you're like, okay, this is, have I done everything? I don't think actually I have. So I will spend some more time on this. This is, have I met what I'm capable of today? Maybe, maybe not. If not, then I keep going. And if I have, then I'm good. I'm done for now. And I think you could even, yeah, just go a step further and just adding this like for now, you know, I can come back to this idea and make it even better. And I really truly believe in that. How often do you go back to work that you've already created and just say, you know what, it's time for me to build another iteration into this?
Exceedingly rarely, because sometimes I have endless drafts, because anytime an idea pops in my head, I'm like, I have to write this down, a couple bullet points, and then when I'm ready to write the next thing, I'll cycle through this Rolodex and see what I want to do. I've ended up half writing the same piece multiple times before, because
Mm,
I forgot that I had already thought about this. Um, Sometimes I've tried to go in and edit a piece, whether it was a draft or something I've already published, because I need to revise this. And for some reason, so there's this thing in psychology called functional fixedness. And it's basically, you look at something and you're like, that's the only way it can look. That's the only way it can work.
mhm,
There's like a classic example in like intro psychology textbooks where it's like you're given like a candle, a matchbox, and some tacks, and you're like, put this on the wall. And people are like, so they're just putting the thumbtacks in the fucking candle, trying to get into the wall. And it's like, you can take the matches out of the box, tack the box to the wall, and put the candle in it. Like, you have to, like thinking outside the box. When I read an article, especially when I've written, my brain is like, that is chiseled in stone. It cannot be fixed after a certain point, because every time I try to look at it again, my brain is like, yes, but this is how it is. It's fixed. So sometimes instead of trying to revise a piece, I've just written it from scratch.
mm,
Because then when I end up saying this similar things, but probably more polished, um, but in a way that circumvents that functional fixedness that I will struggle with. Of like, okay, I want to talk about this again, but I've tried to edit this and it's been 3 hours and I'm just looking at the same fucking thing. Let me just start from scratch. And that draft is always better. And the way I will do it is I will write out that piece, the revision, and then I will look at the old one and say, is there anything critical in the old version that I need to bring over? That is a much different process, because then I'm just like sniping like individual things to bring over, rather than what about this can be changed. That's too much for me. It's just not how my brain works. Um, that's part of my process. Sometimes I will. Honestly, though, especially now, like, I'm in the process of writing a book and things, rather than going back and editing some of the articles that I'm turning into like chapters or chapter sections, I'm I'm just writing the chapter from scratch. And then I go back to the article version and say, is there anything here that I missed? That's been much easier.
mm. That makes sense. It's like I have that same problem where you're like, I came up with this visual before. I just never drew it like all the way. Or uh yeah, the same with writing. It's really, if you never like actually follow through and execute on something all the way, you never close the loop, then yeah, you have all these half circles that are just kind of sitting around in your drafts. So yeah, I definitely feel you on that. And what's also I think it's also cool what you're doing is, in a way, it's like the first time you write something or in your drafts, or you've actually published, it's almost like the that was loading the idea, and you're kind of deep diving into certain parts of it later on by rewriting it into a chapter. It's almost like you're expanding little pockets in the ideas that you came up with.
Well, so This is another thing I wanted to talk to you about, like, where do you draw inspiration? So, like, for me, touching on that, my sort of creative process, one, I'm always looking for ideas and connecting things into. I am naturally obsessed with like psychology, entrepreneurship, and creativity. And it took me a minute to come to terms with that of like, well, then let me just talk about these things. Like, what can you not shut the fuck up about? Then don't. Just do it. Like, just obsess over it, give yourself to it fully, done. Rather than trying to like shoehorn yourself into a specific niche or a specific thing of like, what can you not talk about? Cool, go talk about that thing. What is the most natural, organic, aligned, effortless thing that you can do? Give yourself permission to do that thing. So, one, I'm always looking at things through the lens of psychology because I am a psychologist by training. Um, but beyond that, the people that I coach are creators, right? Whether it is like they're a YouTuber or they're an entrepreneur who creates content some way or whatever, right? So I get a lot of inspiration from coaching sessions. I also will, when I have, my own membership community where we have group coaching calls like office hours and things, that is a shit ton of inspiration for me. And then I also will either run workshops for other like creator communities or even colleges sometimes. And I also have been brought in to do like group coaching for some other communities as well, for like mindset coaching kind of shit. And every time I come out of any of those sessions, I have 5 to 8 ideas for content because it's like, if these people or if this person is struggling with this or has this question or this insight I shared resonated with them, it's probably going to resonate with a lot of other people, or a lot of other people are probably struggling with this. Um, so that is where I draw a lot of my inspiration. One, just living life, walking around, reading shit, whatever. But a lot of it comes through interacting with people, one, the people that I serve, but also the people that I would love to be around regardless, because dude, I fucking love creators. Where do you draw your inspiration?
Mm. Yeah, I think similarly, I think the thread we probably share is most of the inspiration I get is from people too, people in relationships. For me, it's, my students, both in high school and the cohorts, other creators. And there's this interesting thing that I do in particular when it comes to inspiration. Like, I kind of think of it in two different phases, or two different, I guess, approaches. The first is like a passive form of inspiration where you just kind of like, just by living life, you're coming across things and being inspired by it. I mean, like, you cannot be in. It's just like by just opening up and attuning your attention out into the world, you're like, oh wow, this is a cool idea. This is a cool idea. This is a cool idea. If you're reading books, if you're listening to podcasts, if you're just having conversations with cool people, then you're building up this great vehicle for drawing inspiration passively in the world. What's actually more important, though, especially if you're in a field where creativity on demand is critical to your livelihood, then I think you have to have a more active form of inspiration where you're not just waiting for inspiration to hit you. You need to start and work and do a thing for today. And with that approach, I have like an examining approach that is active, meaning I take an idea or a concept or an object even, and just ask very intentional questions. What does this remind me of? What is this? What is this like? What is this unlike? Is this part of a system? Is this a part of a process where there's an action and reaction? These kinds of really practical questions to just get you started to think about something. And almost within 5 minutes, there is an idea, and an idea that I can move on or move forward with. That kind of active approach is far more fun for me than waiting for something to hit me. Even when it comes to writing something, like what I will do is oftentimes read a newsletter or take a book out of the bookshelf that is related to the thing that I want to write about or think about. And I will probably read about the first page or listen to a podcast for the first like 5 minutes or get through the first 3 to 4 paragraphs of a newsletter where I have a thought. And instead of continuing to read, I will write my responses very similarly, examining more actively. Like, what does this remind me of? What is this related to? How is this similar to this? How is it dissimilar to that? Um, what is this a function of? Like, these kinds of questions are enough to make it fun because I'm like, oh, that's an interesting insight that I just had there. And whether or not like that insight is mind bending for the rest of the world, it's still new to me. And so that is what makes it fun. And so I find that that kind of two-part passive active inspiration um, is really critical to my process. What about you?
So I ask a lot of those exact same questions. It also, one, I'm a slow reader naturally, but I read so much slower because I can't get more than a paragraph or two, and I'm like, "Oh, fuck, that's a really good
Is there an
idea,"
idea?
or all
Yeah,
this
that's
it
right.
makes me think of this thing over here.
Yeah,
Dude, it takes me fucking forever to read a book, and at this point, even, like, trying to read fiction has also started to creep in because I'm like, "Oh, this is a really fun way to, like, set up this scene. These are really good details. All this pacing's really good. Oh, they
the
gave
language.
me." Yeah, exactly. Or like, oh, they just, um, what's his name? Jim Butcher,
Mm,
like Dresden Files. One
yes,
thing he
love
does,
that.
okay, so
I love
one thing
Dustin
he
House.
does, yeah, so he's really good at basically like every chapter, every so many chapters, basically being like, hey, here's everything that's happened just in case you forgot, right? And he folds it in. I'm like, I can almost be lazy because it's like he's going to keep me up to date, right? And he tees it up really, really well. I also appreciate it because tangent, he plays D&D, or at
Mm,
least likes D&D. He rolled Harry Dresden, like he rolled him as a character.
really?
Yeah, he was in an interview talking about this, and
That's
he
funny.
said that like when he rolled his stats, he ended up Harry had a really high constitution, so he was like, oh, what this means is I can put this character through all kinds of shit because he has the health, the constitution to deal with it.
Mm,
So that's one reason he like Harry just gets fucked up all the time, is because he rolled a high constitution for his stat. Yeah, fucking love it. So I have even more affinity for the series, but it makes it really hard for me to read shit. But there are these two things, and I've written about them. I've turned them into podcast episodes as well. But in psychology, there's this thing called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon,
yep, yep.
and the easiest way I can explain it is whatever you look for, you find. Okay, that's effectively all it means. So, like if when my fiance and I got together, she drove a red Jeep. And when we got together, I suddenly saw red Jeeps or Jeeps in general all over the road. And I don't remember seeing a lot of them before that. The reality was there was the same number of them, but my perceptual awareness had expanded to include those. So like typically as I'm going about living my life, Jeeps are coming through. My brain's like, that isn't relevant. Forget about it. But now that I'm with a girl with a Jeep, for some reason, my brain's like, hey, there's another Jeep. That's fun. And then suddenly I'm paying attention to all these other Jeeps, but I'm also remembering that I came across them throughout the day. Um, and the way I kind of use this in a creative aspect is um, so like there was when I was working on an article called The Hidden Cost of Success. Basically, success has two costs. the price you pay to achieve success, so grinding it out, sacrificing, whatever. But then there's the second cost, the hidden cost, which is the price you pay after achieving success. So, like, maybe you want to become a best-selling author. Okay, so you know what you got to do. You know the price it takes to achieve success. You got to grind it out. You got to work marketing, write a really great book, all this other shit. But the hidden cost is maybe sophomore syndrome, where you're like, fuck, what if my second book isn't good enough? Or suddenly, okay, I became a best-selling author. What's all the shit that comes with that? Like Tim Ferriss, we talked about earlier, he talked about how after 4 Hour Workweek came out, he bought like his dream home, but he bought it in his name and he got fucking stalkers. So he's
Mm,
like, so I had to move out of my dream house because of fucking stalkers. So now when I buy things, I buy it under a pseudonym, basically, so I don't get stalked.
mhm,
Right. And it's like, it's those little things of like, are you willing to deal with the price of success, basically, of fame or wealth? Now you got family members coming out of the woodwork. Like, are you willing to deal with that? So as I was writing this article, I was like, this is the next piece I have to write. So I basically said, hey, brain, just broaden your awareness to anything reasonably related to this hidden cost of success. That week, I was listening to a podcast, and it was the Armchair Expert podcast with Dak Shepard. He had Jake Johnson, who's Nick from New Girl. He had him on, and Nick was talking about the hidden cost of success and how Nick decided to not do a bunch of movies because it would basically take him away from his family. So he's like, I'm not going to get on that hamster wheel of promoting a movie and doing this and doing that. And then I was on Instagram, and then I saw Dwayne Johnson talking about the hidden cost of success. And he was basically like, look, I can't just roll up to fucking Walmart or something. Like, in order for me to go out to a store in public, I have to call ahead. We have to coordinate with the police department and also the shit. He was like, because every single time I've just gone to a store, a mob has formed and we've had to call the cops to get me out because people just swarm me. He was like, but here's the thing. I remember when I had $7 in my pocket and nobody knew my name. I will gladly accept this hidden cost because I know what the alternative is. So it's like Nick's sitting there saying, I don't want this hidden cost. I'm not willing to deal with that. But then Dwayne is like, no, I am willing to do that. And like the point, and then I had a bunch of other examples from like Kahi, Paul Millard, some other people. And just the whole premise was like, are you like, understand what this hidden cost is before you go down this road? It's not a good or bad. It's not a right or wrong. It's, are you willing to pay this hidden cost or not? That's a question only you can answer. But the fact that I was like, hey, brain, this is what I'm going to work on. Suddenly my brain was like, here's an idea, here's a tweet, here's a reel, here's this, here's that. And by the end of the week, the article was already half written just because my brain had just been passively paying attention to all this shit. And like, that's one of the things that, like, again, like I've written about it. I got, content elsewhere on it. Um, but when I teach creativity, like creative practices, that's one of the first things I talk about because it's so fucking powerful. And like, it's passive creativity, as effortless as it can be. You're just leveraging what your brain is already going to be doing, right? And then the second piece is, this is a completely made up term by me. I just kind of call it like lenses of inspiration. Um, so like anytime I look at anything, I view it as a psychologist, right? So like when I'm watching um Big Mouth, we just finished watching Big Mouth because the final season just came out. I'm sitting here watching this and I'm like, what are the psychological aspects of like, oh, they're sharing, they've um anthropomorphized, anxiety or depression. Like, oh, they made depression like this big cat that like sits on your chest. Okay, that's really interesting, right? Um, or if I'm watching another show, I'm looking at like, what are the interpersonal dynamics going on right now? Oh, they wrote this character probably as if they have borderline personality disorder. That's why they're so fucking emotional and tumultuous or shit. All this other character, they've definitely got some like undiagnosed whatever. I'm always just looking at those little things, right? I remember um, one of my old supervisors, her husband, he's a lot of things. He's an attorney, he's a lobbyist, he's an entrepreneur. I remember he came to our class one time in grad school, and one of the things he was talking about was, as an attorney and a lobbyist, he's always looking at, laws that are coming down the pipeline. And what he found was, at that time, there was legislation coming down that was going to ban teen tanning beds. So teenagers would not be allowed to tan.
Mm,
It's going to be law. And he was like, the interesting thing with that is a lot of people who own tanning beds are going to scramble because suddenly a lot of because teens want to be tan for prom, for homecoming, for things like this, right? At least the pasty ones. So like he was like, there's a huge opportunity there because what it doesn't outlaw is spray tanning.
hmm
He was like, so a savvy entrepreneur would pivot that and basically create spray tanning for teens, right? Because like, hey, you legally can't tan, you legally can't go to a tanning bed, but you can look tan. Because it was like teens don't care about being tan; they just want to look a little bit darker. And the reason I use that story is because he was seeing everything through the lens of entrepreneurship. Like everything, everybody else was like, oh, fuck, like teens can't tan anymore. He was like, there's a business opportunity here. And when you look at everything in your day through the lenses of a psychologist, an entrepreneur, a writer, a this, a that, you will see inspiration everywhere. What are your thoughts?
It's funny. Like this is one of the first things we talk about in thinking in visual metaphors. Like specifically the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. I also call it selective attention bias. A little bit easier sometimes to remember than the name. But yeah, we talk about this exactly, like how you can actually use this bias to your benefit, because by priming your attention towards the right things, you then allow less luck and chance for inspiration and insight to hit you. And one of the more practical things that we do is we create 12 key problems. And this comes from Tiago Forte's books, Building a Second Brain. Uh, lots of content written about this particular approach that came from Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was one of the most prolific physicists out there, Nobel Peace winning physicist, and very prolific. And people would ask him, like, how are you so prolific? How do you come up with so many ideas? And he just said, well, you know what? Like, I'm always thinking about ideas. I'm always thinking about this stuff, just not directly. And everyone's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, I have these problems that I'm working on. I've articulated and crystallized these key problems that I'm working on. So it came to be known as the 12 key problems. And so one of the things we do in the course is we come up with these key problems and we try to put them front of mind and have our subconscious kind of be working on them, whether we're taking a shower, whether we're driving or whatever. And I will actually sometimes just, have a thing that I'm working on before I go into a shower, before I go on a walk. I'll just kind of refresh my mind on like, what are the problems? And then I just look at the problems. I don't like actively think about it. I just kind of like have, because you're always thinking, regardless of whether you want to or not, why not just allow it to be directed a little bit? And sometimes I'll just wake up with the answer and it'll be like, oh, that's the first thing I'll do. Or in the middle of the night, I'm like thinking something pops up. May not be always great, but it's an idea. And so, yeah, I completely resonate with this approach, um, and using it specifically as this guiding light to help direct your attention, to prime your attention on the right thing. And this idea of the lens that you use is also really, really helpful, because I think sometimes this goes back to what we were talking about way earlier when we're talking about being overwhelmed with all the different things that you could do, niches and whatnot. And everyone has a certain level of expertise in something. And if you look at, let's say, an interest that you have, like let's say you're interested in productivity and you're like, all right, well, everything under the sun has already been said under for productivity, but yet people are still creating content. Now, some people are regurgitating the same stuff, but some people are still coming up with very interesting ideas related to productivity. And those people are not necessarily reinventing the wheel of the concepts behind, time management, energy management, and all these different approaches that you can take to become a more productive self. But they are framing it in the context of a specific lens. Like productivity for psychologists is going to be very different than productivity for a teacher. And getting more specific, productivity for a high school teacher. Getting more specific, productivity for a high school film teacher, right? So having a lens to distill all of the selective attention that you're having helps even funnel that inspiration into something that is actually malleable into some kind of form that is then presentable for an audience to then gather an insight. So I think that that is all something that, yeah, I completely agree with. And yeah, on a practical side of things, if you want to be more intentional about setting your lens to the right direction, hoping that it will be primed to the right thing, trying out and look up, 12 key problems, that can be really, really valuable and helpful to just like, again, be more intentional about that.
So you brought up your course. Can you run me through like what it is, why you created it, and who is it for?
Yeah, so thinking in visual metaphors, which actually the name comes from our good friend, thinking and storytelling, Lawrence Yo. Like, I was like, Lawrence, man, you inspired this course title. And I call it thinking in visual metaphors for a very specific reason. I don't call it how to 10x your personal brand or whatever, like, because that's not the promise I want to make. That's not the goal. And I am, I've, I'm continuously astounded by just the thoughtfulness and the heart of the people that end up gravitating towards this course. And I feel like the title of the course is partly the reason for the draw. The students who end up taking the course, who it's for rather, it's, I would say aspiring creators and educators, anyone who teaches, coaches, who is trying to basically convey an idea that is complex and try to simplify it in a way, and entrepreneurs, founders, that are trying to, yes, if they want to build a personal brand, but I try not to focus on that particular aspect. The focus is, there are people who are creators first and there are people who are entrepreneurs first. And if you're a creator, you are an entrepreneur so that you can create. If you're an entrepreneur, you create so that you can make money. So like, obviously everyone needs money, the world makes the world go around and whatnot, but there is a subtle difference between the two. I probably gravitate more towards attracting people who are aspiring creators who also are making a living. So if you're an entrepreneur who is creating, but you are 100% focused on just making money and just like thinking of creating is a means to an end, then the course may not 100% align with your values. I don't know. It just depends. But um, the main uh, goal for the course and the reason I created it is to, one, demystify some of the magic behind, a visual, like thinking, oh, like how can somebody make this? I don't think it's in my reach. This is just something that is constrained to someone who can create art. And it's funny you said you brought up Da Vinci, because I like to say, like, you don't have to be Leonardo da Vinci to make visual metaphors. Like, it's not about making things pretty, it's about making things pithy, and it's about trying to convey ideas in a way that, again, resonate with your audience. And there are so many different tools, and when I say tools, I'm not talking about apps, I mean thinking tools that you can leverage in order to convey ideas in a visual way that isn't necessarily like beautiful, pretty art. It's meant to be um, something that is uh, focusing on ideas and making those ideas shine. And I oftentimes, I also think it's really been helpful for people who write. Funny enough, as a writer, you might appreciate this, because what visual thinking and visual metaphors does is it helps clarify your idea even more. Like, you cannot hide behind a visual, meaning if your idea is not clear, you can't hide. Like, you can't use pretty words because the idea will not be fully clear. So I built the course to hopefully demystify some of the process and to, it may sound a little bit corny, but somewhere along the lines of being a creator, I came up with what my purpose is. And it's not, and a lot of times, people will say, "Oh, this is your side hustle." And I'm like, I don't think of it as a side hustle. First off, I hate that term, side hustle. Like, it sounds like I'm trying to hustle someone out of their money. That's not really what I'm trying to do. I kind of think of this as in alignment to, like, what I'm doing in thinking in visual metaphors in the course, in the cohort course, is in line with what I do in high school, which is, and the bigger purpose, the bigger vision is to encourage people to build a daily creative practice or a regular creative practice, regardless of your cadence. Maybe you do it daily, maybe you do it every other day, maybe you do it every week, whatever is in reach for your particular circumstances. But it is to encourage people to have some kind of creative practice to make the world a more creative place. And I think that's the ultimate goal for me. And it's in alignment to what I'm trying to do in the course. Again, in alignment with what I'm trying to do with my high school students. I'm not necessarily suggesting you do this for a living, but I do think, again, whether or not it's visual thinking, whether it's filmmaking, animation, whatever, that it is something that will add value to your life and the people that you come in contact with, hopefully. So the course is 3 weeks. It is a cohort based course, so we meet in live sessions, and I try to do things almost like crazy, unscalable ways, where I record direct looms for people. If they have a question that I've already answered, I don't just point them to a link. I will walk them through it again, personalizing it to whatever it is that they're asking. And I definitely do things in the course that I have been advised not to do. Like, I invite people back for free. Like, I don't charge like a premium price for, lifetime, or come back. You have to pay like 3, 4 times the price of the course in order to be able to come back a few times. Like, I just say, hey, you know what? I want students back. I want to build a relationship with students over time. And I think there's value in repeating the course. So that's one of the things that I've kind of built into the course. The goal is to really help people build the skill. And yeah, I just find tremendous fulfillment in like meeting with people, seeing them like, I can do this. Like, I love seeing like in the chat where they're saying, this is not impossible. This is not as hard as I thought it would be. Or like, I even had someone post in one of the comments uh, like 2 sessions ago that, I'm just amazed that you don't have to be Leonardo da Vinci to do this. And I was like, yes. Oh my God. Like, it's as if you are part of my marketing plan. No, that's amazing. How did you, like, that's insane that you said that. Um so yeah, the main thing that's really also been super cool is just, we've had a lot of like bumps, like technical bumps in the course. And I there was a hurricane that came through Houston. You remember, you're in Texas, so like, there's a hurricane that came, took out the power, and I had no internet. And I wrote, thankfully, to the community like, FYI, hurricane's coming. Houston sucks when it comes to power. Might not be able to make it to this next session. And everyone was just so supportive. And, I unfortunately lost family members during cohorts, and everyone's just been super supportive. And it's just, I feel like the people that are attracted to the course are just my favorite people on the internet. And so, yeah, I just find that to be super fulfilling. And, I don't know how long I'll be able to continue to do it, how long people will continue to be interested in it. But yeah, I hope to continue to keep doing it as long as people will be interested in it. So
And where can people go to find out more?
it's on the Maven platform. Thinking in visual metaphors. Probably the best way is through you know, looking up MilaniCreative.art, and you'll see all my links to my newsletters and whatnot. But yeah, thinking in visual metaphors on Maven.
Awesome. And the upcoming cohort is number what?
Number 12, I'll be going over 500 students at this point, which is insane to think about. But yeah, it's been really cool. We also really cool. Just side note, for second year in a row, I was recognized as Maven 100. So the course was recognized as Maven 100, like one of the top 100 courses on Maven. Um, and yeah, so that's there's going to be a upcoming promotion that's coming up in like June, mid June. So yeah, if you're interested, keep your eyes peeled on my LinkedIn for that.
That's awesome. One of the, I think it's Jack Black or somebody said it in like School of Rock, maybe. And it was this quote about those who can't do teach, those who can't teach, teach gym.
Yeah.
But there's this, because like I remember like my like high school art teachers or, other people or college, literature professors and shit. And it was like very few people who teach do the thing they teach. Big either because they couldn't make it work professionally, or they were only interested in critiquing other people's work rather than creating their own because it's just so much safer psychologically to just complain about everybody else. You were one of those people who you taught, period. Like you taught film and shit for a long time. You still do. But then you went out and created your own stuff. So you have the teaching background, the art background, the actual portfolio of shit you yourself have created. And now you've come around and you're teaching other people to help sort of unlock their own creativity and creative expression, right? Because I think a lot of people, anytime I hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm just not creative," I'm like, you just aren't seeing it as creativity. More than likely, either you're not putting yourself in an environment where you're drawing a lot of inspiration, or you're letting fear and insecurity and self-doubt overwhelm you to the point that you question your creative abilities so that you don't express your creativity. So I think there's that, but then there's also a lot of people who are like, I believe I am creative, but I don't know how to express it. I am so afraid of hitting publish. I don't know how to be pithy. I don't know how to find ideas or create ideas and communicate them to other people in a way that is valuable and worth doing. So man, that's why like I love that you have this course, because you have the teaching background, you have the art creativity background, but you also fucking do it. Like you're not that of like those who can't do teach. Like you are doing and teaching. You're not teaching gym, I'm assuming, but you are actively doing it. And I remember reading On Writing by Stephen King. And that's the only Stephen King book I've ever read. I haven't read any of his other shit. But like, I loved it so much because, if for no other reason, people who do great work rarely teach how they did great work.
Hmm.
So most of the people teaching how to do great work haven't made great work. Right? Think of how many writing books there are by people who the only thing they write is books on how to write
Right,
books.
right, right.
And it's like, that's just a fucking pyramid scheme. So like, or a Ponzi scheme and shit. You actively create visual metaphors. You did 50, what was it, 54 in like how many days? Less than a week,
Yeah.
right? Because
Mm.
you failed in air quotes to make 100 in a week. You're actively doing it. You've built the audience of over 400K. You've been doing it for over 3 years. You've made over 900 posts. correction, you've published over 900 posts,
Yeah.
right? There's probably a huge back catalog of shit that hasn't seen the light of day, plus drafts and everything else. I can't think of many people who are better suited to teach a course like this. So I definitely think that anybody who's interested in sort of unlocking their creative expression or just interested in a new route to doing it, um, they should most definitely check out the course, because it's taught by somebody who's actually doing the work and doing great work. So highly recommend it. Then kind of start to land this plane. And we'll have links and show notes and shit as far as like where all people can find you. But you said MilaniCreative.art.
Hmm. Hmm.
MilaniCreative.art
Yeah.
would be the main one. And then you just look up Milani Creative on all the social media platforms. But I'll make sure I have those in the show notes. Um, let's pretend it is the anniversary of your death. So you died a year ago.
Mm.
Only one visual metaphor or piece of content
Mm.
you created has lasted. Which one do you hope it is?
Mm. That is a that's a thoughtful question. Hmm. I created a piece very recently inspired by Sahil Bloom's book, Five Types of Wealth. And it's a visual metaphor about financial wealth specifically. And the reason this particular visual like really kind of sits home with me is my dad, who passed away a little over a year ago, he lost all of his wealth when we moved to the States from Iran. And, we grew up without, like, in, like, when I say he lost all of his wealth, all the wealth that he worked his butt off for all of his life. And it wasn't like we were wealthy, but he lost everything that he worked so hard in Iran to build when we came to the States. And so what that ended up doing for him is that it shifted his attention towards just building that wealth back. And or and it's hard to say wealth. It's more like building the ability to survive with money back, and not feel like you're going to have your family starve. And so he was obsessed with that, and he worked his butt off the rest of his life, um, focused on that. There eventually came a point where he had quote unquote made it, meaning he had made it to the point where we no longer had to worry about if we were going to be able to pay the rent. It's not that we were wealthy, but he was no longer in a state where it was in always crisis mode. And it took a long time to get there. I remember when I was in middle school, he broke down in front of me just crying because we weren't sure if we were going to be able to pay the rent. But once he was able to, he wasn't able to turn that off. Like, meaning he couldn't turn off that anxiety, that fear, um that, oh my God, what am I gonna do for next month? Like, he couldn't turn it off, even though we were okay. And I would say for the last like 10, 15 years of my dad's life, every time I saw him, that's what he would talk about. Even when he had Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, and he had lost his ability to do a lot of other things, the fear and the anxiety was still there when we would talk. And that's what he would be talking about. He may not even know that I was there. He may not even know it was me, but that's what he was. he would be talking about. Sometimes it would not be coherent, but that's what he would be focused on. And that just struck me how dangerous it can be to focus only on financial wealth throughout the course of your life. So, as I was reading Sahil's book and thinking about my dad's life, I had this one visual where on the top is basically a faucet filling up a bucket, and that's your money. That's the amount of money that you're making. And then on the right are three flowers, like relationships and all the things that you should be using water to nurture. So that's what's happening on the top. On the bottom is we have all these buckets of water now. Yet none of them have been used to nurture the flowers, and the flowers have wilted. And it is just meant as a reminder to remember why you're building wealth, why you're trying to get money. It's not to say that all you need is love to make life move forward. It is just to say that if you focus only on money to the detriment of nurturing the things that that money is supposed to nurture, like it's a means to an end, always remember that, then you will end up regretting a lot, or at least the people in your life that you end up leaving behind. If it's been a year since I've passed, those people will then be living the regret of that focus. And so, you know, uh, I just think about that visual in particular, and I hope that it will act as a reminder to my kids and anyone else who may find value in it that it is important to have enough water. It's important to know that there is water that you can get without having to worry about drought. But just be careful that that is not the only focus, and to remember what that water is for. Like the water in and of itself, just building a bunch of buckets is not going to do you any good.
Dude, that's such a fucking good answer. I'm so glad I asked. Literally, like I wrote that down as we were talking. I was like, I really want to end on a strong question, and I don't think I have one yet. And then just as we were talking, I was like, this seems like a good one.
That was a
So
good question. Yeah.
thanks. Um, oh, it's so good. Okay. Um, I'll also try to pull that and like add that, like a link to that in the show notes. Because I definitely think more people need to see it. Um, any parting words for today?
I think if I was to suggest to anyone any one thing, it would be that to expand your definition, one, of creativity. That's one. That it is not narrowly defined to the traditional arts, and that it's something that like it's like trying to describe the value of creativity is trying to describe color if you don't see color, like if you've never seen color. It's not to say like, oh, these people who create are better, or that they are able to tap into more than you. It is just to say, like, you can't understand the value until you practice it in some respect. If you've been waiting, if you're like me, who just was like, "Ah, one day I too will participate in the world in some creative way." If that's you, there will never be a perfect time. And that's where I made a mistake. That's why I didn't start posting until I was in my 40s. And I was like at a point where I was like, I'm either going to just die and just always have this mindset of like, what if, or I'm just going to just take the first step and see what happens. And I can always course correct. So if you're someone who's been waiting for that right time, I'll tell you right now, there will never be a right time. In fact, doing it at the worst time will be evidence to yourself that you can do it in any situation. And so, it's how I had that mindset almost towards everything. It's how I actually ended up launching the course. Like, I hesitated for like, people were asking me about having a course for a long time. And even then I had the same mindset. Oh wait, I have to get it perfect before I launch this course. And I had a friend who just said, "Dude, you're just afraid." And I was like, "Yeah, you're not wrong." And so I ended up launching a beta, and that was the first iteration. And anyone who took the beta knows that what it is now and what it was then is dramatically better because I iterated on it. And going back to this idea of perfection and iteration and perfecting in public, all that, like, just get started, improve as you go. You don't need to know as much as you think to get started. And that would be my encouragement to anyone who's been thinking about who's just like me, is just like wondering, should I don't know, maybe later, maybe not, maybe once I understand this, maybe once I understand my niche and whatever. Just, yeah, again, as cliche as it may sound, just start.
Also, one more thing before you go. If you enjoyed this episode, there are two things you can do to share the wealth. One, send this episode to someone who needs to hear this message and tell them why it was so impactful for you. Two, take like literally 3 seconds to either like or leave a hopefully 5-star review, but be honest, because there's a lot of fluff and bullshit out there, and people are looking for content that's actually valuable. So a little social proof from people like you giving the show a good review goes a long way. Thanks for listening/watching. And until next time, take it easy.